to welcome you to this event that's hosted by the Sheffield branch of the Psychologists for Social Change Network. And I'm Diane Morrison. I'm a clinical psychologist working in Sheffield. We just wanted to share with you our passion and belief that social change and social justice should be at the centre of our work as psychologists, and how important we feel that it is that this is woven through clinical training and beyond. And since we set up the group, members have been active in and supportive of various campaigns, both local and national, around social issues and mental health and social justice. There'll be time for questions and discussion at the end, so please do write questions in the chat as we go along, and feel free to use the chat as a way to network and connect as well. Please put your mics on mute, but it would be great to have your cameras on throughout so that we can see your lovely faces. So I'd like to start by introducing Ellen to tell us more about the Sheffield group developments.
Hi everyone, I'm Ellen Duff. I'm a clinical psychologist working in Sheffield as well. And I just want to give a short kind of, summary of kind of how this group came about really. So I think it must have been about 5 years ago, I became aware of Psychologists Against Austerity, like the national group, and the things that they were doing, raising awareness of the impact of austerity, the government's austerity policies on people's mental health. And I attended a national meeting, and I wanted to set up something locally. And at the time I was working in Sheffield, but living in Leeds. So I took on the ambitious task of trying to set up a group in both places. And it wasn't very well attended at first. The Leeds one was better attended. The first Sheffield one, we had Diane and her daughter coming, making placards for an anti-austerity march for the Tory party conference, which was great, but small. And I was trying to do that all by myself, and it wasn't very well attended, and I kind of lost confidence, I think, in it, and I kind of gave up on trying to organise it for maybe another year or two, until I saw Diane at a kind of a work event, and she really encouraged me to kind of start it up again, and I kind of said, well, I will if you will, kind of thing, and we kind of decided to do it together. And for me, that's been the key to keeping it going, is that, you know, we book a room, we send an email, we have a regular time and place, and people come, and the group kind of makes itself in a way, and it doesn't have to be my responsibility to carry it all. We carry it together, and I really like that. And just, I think I've talked through a lot of the notes that I had already. I guess the other thing to say that I thought when I first started this, that we might do kind of coordinated campaigns, that we might have, you know, find an issue that was really relevant locally and work together to devise resources and to plan events and to have a focused campaign on something. And it didn't really kind of pan out like that, and I think in many ways what it's become is something different to that, and just as good really. It's been kind of more low-key. We meet once a month, we support each other, we share ideas. For me, it's a place to recharge, to meet with people, kind of like-minded people, and to build confidence in acting in ways that fit with my values in different settings. And that has kind of inspired me really, and helped me to speak out at work about the impact of government policies on mental health, to feed that into formulation when when I'm at work, to go to peer support groups and speak to service users and experts by experience about this, and to talk about it elsewhere in my life. And it's had an impact on me in a number of areas of my life, which I'm not going to go into now, but I will kind of hand over to the other kind of regular members of the group to talk about some of the ways in which coming to this group and being a part of this network and this kind of small community has kind of created small ripples of change in many different contexts in many different ways. And I hope you'll be as inspired as I am by by some of the things that people have done. Thank you.
Thanks, Ellen. What we wanted to do now is show our promotional video, which is very much a work in progress, and it's something that we've done collaboratively together, and it's the beginning really of a process that we hope to continue with more of you. Fantastic. So I'd like to invite Irel and Dale now to talk about the work that they've been involved in around anti-racism pledges and action.
Yeah, I'm Irel. I'm a third year trainee clinical psychologist at Sheffield. And then we've got Dale.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Dale. I'm a first year trainee clinical psychologist at Leicester. Lovely to see a few of you and really nice to share this space with you. I'm a little bit emotional after seeing that video. I've seen it a few times, but the music and everything tonight's got me quite emotional, which is nice. So a lovely start. I'm going to share this first part of this slot with you, just talking a little bit about some of the work we've done, that Ireland and I've done with the national group in anti-racism pledges and actions. So following the rapid emergence of quite a large body of robust research evidence highlighting the disproportionate impact of COVID on racially minoritized groups, a call was put out by the National Psychologists for Change group, asking for people from regional subgroups to get together, reflect on the events and consider how we might appropriately respond. And then following the abominable death of George Floyd in America and the worldwide growth of the Black Lives Matter movement, it was clear that we needed to kind of expand our remit and include anti-racism directly. So around 20 of us from groups all over the country met regularly, creating a safe space for reflection and discussion. And then over time, as a group, we felt that it was appropriate to move to a position of committed action. And after a lot of hard work, we collaboratively produced 2 documents, a letter and a poster. So these were sent to NHS CEOs all around the country and service managers nationally to encourage conversations and to stimulate further committed action in tackling systemic racism in the NHS, which we all know exists. So members of the Sheffield group have used these in conversations in trust and services throughout the region. That's also spread to educational settings and council services. And then our colleagues in other regional branches have also shared this throughout their local areas. So we've created pockets of change all over the country, all over the UK, in pushing for systemic change to create anti-racism in the NHS. So here's a poster for you all to have a quick look at. I'm hoping Irel's going to be able to share this. So this is a poster that we sent out. It accompanied a letter which was a bit more detailed, but we thought just for tonight, for visual impact, we'll give you a moment just to read this and just to take it in.
This is also available on our Twitter page along with the letter, so you can have another look at it if you want to read it in a bit more detail as well. So the other part of our work with the national group was also kind of recognising that kind of safe spaces for reflections, there's not really enough of that around, and there's quite a lot of perceived barriers to having those kind of reflections on racism and anti-racism. So we kind of felt that we needed to model that. And the way that we kind of started that was having an idea of, right, let's just get together as this kind of national group and reflect together and see if we can put out something that can help people have those conversations themselves, whether that's at work or at training courses, or, you know, whoever feels like they might need to use that space. So at the moment, the process is we're not quite sure how we're going to disseminate that yet, whether that's going to be like some audio clips of our discussions as modelling and examples, or whether that's going to be releasing some questions. So we're not quite decided on that yet, but what we have started doing is having the reflective conversations together to see what comes up. And what I thought was really nice is that some spaces I've been in has been quite majority white, even when talking about racism, and therefore it does become quite centred on the white experience as well, just naturally, and that's not always the most helpful way forward either. So what was really good in this group is that we are quite a diverse group of people, and everyone kind of voted on how they wanted the process to be. And what we did was we had one kind of white group and one people of colour group who separated out for some of it, and then we joined together at the end to share reflections together, and that seemed to work really well in creating safe spaces, but also be able to learn from each other. So at the moment we're kind of not talking about all the details of what we've discussed before we've decided on how to kind of disseminate that properly, but look out for that. And I guess it just feels really positive to get together, have a proper space to really kind of consider the impact of racism and what we can do about it as well. And one of the questions, for example, that we discussed the last time I was there was, how much do you notice people's race? How much do you pay attention to power imbalances with regards to that? And it just led to loads of really fruitful conversations and really interesting reflections together. And I guess for me, having the time to reflect on this, it's something that I don't feel like I've had enough of in the past. And I guess I can see how it's really helping me be more aware of these issues in my clinical work, as well as during my thesis work, and all of these things is kind of impacting all of these different areas. And I think it's happening more and more in lots of different spaces, which I think is really positive. So we're hoping we can make some small contribution to kind of guiding and helping out with that as well.
Thanks so much, Irel and Dale. So next up we have Sasha, and she's going to be reflecting on sexual harassment and violence within clinical psychology.
Lovely, thank you everybody for coming today. It's great to see so many people here, and it's a privilege to be presenting with the rest of the group. And it's been quite a process being involved in the last 2 years, and I think it's really enriched my journey through training. I started with the group around the same time that I started training. So this evening I'm going to just focus on a very sort of narrow aspect of, I guess, how being part of Psychologists for Social Change has given me a voice in particular areas that have been very important to me. I'm going to be talking about an article that I wrote alongside James Randall, which we titled Naming the Poison. And we're talking about sexual violence within psychological professions. I guess at this point I'd just like to sort of recognise that this might be a difficult subject for some people. So my talk will be around 7 minutes, and if you'd like to sort of just mute, then that's absolutely fine. So when I was thinking about this presentation, I was considering whether or not this really fits the social change remit. For some reason, I started to question this. And then I was reminded of a quote that I was sent by one of my placement supervisors in my last placement, which was this. And it's by Eleanor Roosevelt, which is, "Where, after all, do universal human rights begin? In small places close to home. Without concerted citizen action to uphold these close to home, we shall look in vain for progress in the larger world." So I'm going to be focusing on ideas around sexual violence within our own professional remit, which might feel uncomfortable. But I think that this has really big implications for what we can do in terms of changing sexual violence, sexual harassment within wider aspects of society, aside from within our own profession. So where did this start, or potentially start? I think one of the things that really kicked me into gear was reading this article, and it's by Young and Haggerty, and they were talking about Psych2. So a lot of people will probably be familiar with Me Too, the recognition that there's a prevalence of sexual violence within society that perhaps we haven't really come to terms with prior to the Me Too campaign. So Young and Haggerty started to recognise and talk about, actually, there's also a real prevalence of sexual violence within psychology that perhaps we haven't recognised. And it's embedded in lots of different ways. They identify how it's been embedded in research, how it's been embedded within the way that research is conducted, and how actually it happens within our own profession. And this sort of the summary, I guess, from their article was that such cases, unfortunately, are not isolated instances of individual bad actors, but rather illustrative of larger structural factors that sanction, if not encourage, abuses of power. For me, this really indicated that this isn't just something that is isolated within our profession. It ripples out, it has big impacts, much wider than just for us. And within mine and James's letter, which was a response to this article, we started with just recognising our position and our position within our profession. So myself and James can, in different ways, both resonate with having personal experiences of sexual violence or harassment within different remits. And we've also gone through the toxic and traumatising systems that can often follow. And I think that that's left us realising that help isn't always helpful. And that has really left us with this personal, professional, and sense of social responsibility that we need to recognise and name some of the difficulties that we've noticed. So what I'm going to do now is just read through part of our letter that we wrote, which comes to some conclusions about what we can do. So it is almost incomprehensible, and most certainly painfully uncomfortable, to think that a profession which is rooted in a desire to understand and alleviate human distress is also complicit in silencing and or perpetuating issues relating to sexual trauma. It's not only overt acts of sexual harassment which can perpetuate the prevalence of sexual violence, such as those highlighted by the Me Too movement. It is also actions which silence, disregard, and undermine these experiences, which allows issues of sexual harassment and violence to remain unrecognised, underreported, and ignored, and therefore unchallenged and maintained. These complicit actions are diverse in nature. They include explicit attempts to ignore instances of sexual harassment within the field, and by that I mean our field. But they also branch out to implicit biases, which we hold about the expected identity of a psychologist. As such, we need to recognise the dynamics of silencing within our own profession. And as Young and Haggerty say in their original article, sexual harassment and violence within our profession isn't a fly that lands on your dessert. It's a bit of poison that's served with every meal. It's through naming the poison that we have been fed that we ask for clinical psychology to finally recognise its own part in the perpetuation of sexual violence and invite the profession to no longer be a bystander. So, dear clinical psychology, firstly, please acknowledge that we're all human. We're not impervious to these experiences. In fact, a lot of us are motivated to take our seats in the world of clinical psychology because we may have experienced some of these experiences. And I've encountered people saying things such as, we're so unlikely to experience sexual violence as a psychologist. And I think we need to just take a moment to sort of understand what that might communicate to somebody who has experienced sexual violence, who is within the profession. Secondly, please practice what we preach. The application of our knowledge should not just sit in the therapy room. It should extend to teaching. It should extend to supervision. And when we're considering whether or not we ask for consent for something, whether that be in teaching, supervision, it should always, if it was in therapy, we would think about it automatically, but we should do that in other arenas too. We need to recognise the complicity in silence. If we ignore the previous two requests, we're signalling that sexual violence doesn't happen to us. And we need to make safe spaces in which people who may have experienced sexual violence, whether it be within the profession or outside the profession, to come forward. Don't engage in humour around engaging in abusive practices. It felt really hard to even include this, but I've experienced it and we've both seen it, so it felt like something we just had to put in. Don't use your position of power as permission to sexually harass colleagues. Again, feels like we shouldn't have to say this, but unfortunately it's something that we feel like we have to make explicit. Don't stand for the reenactment of abuses within team cultures. Victim blaming occurs even within our profession. I've experienced people saying you shouldn't come into work looking so pretty if you don't want something to happen to you. And those sorts of things are inherently victim blaming. So for all of these things, essentially I think what we're saying is summed up within this quote quite well. So trying to teach and supervise trauma-informed practices without first implementing trauma-informed organisational culture change is like throwing seeds on dry land. We can't create wider social change if we don't start at home. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sasha. I just want to say again, if you've got any comments or any questions that you'd like to discuss later, or things that you might just want to share, please do put them in the chat. And now I'd like to invite James to talk about psychology and the climate crisis.
I'm going to talk about pebbles, wasps, and the climate emergency. Which are all irrevocably linked, and you're probably wondering how. So yeah, I live in the general area of Sheffield, Yorkshire, so joined the gang here, but I actually work in Halifax. But to start us off, I guess, a poignant quote that's kind of followed me around for much of my career in clinical psychology is this really. The world is in a bloody mess, and even though I know, as do many others, what it would look like if it weren't, I think that's over there, I have no more viable idea than anyone else how to get there. I do believe, however, that an extremely important step on the way is to take really seriously the fact that we are a society, not a collection of individuals. And this is a quote from David Smell, and this is a quote that really triggered off a lot of thinking that is relevant for psychology social change. For myself, personally, during training, more down south in Hertfordshire, with a group of kind of allies and friends and companions along the way, when we were faced with so many changes in the world, and really things becoming so unstable in terms of like elections and interest in people getting elected, and the increasing humanitarian kind of crisis. So we came up with this idea of pebbles and palms, essentially, of trying to think, actually, when we're trying to think of how to respond to Syrian refugee crisis, for example, we're so drawn to do everything. And this is such a trap in that the more we push ourselves and are compelled by this idea to do everything, is actually we reach that point of just complete destruction and burnout, and that we just wither away and we end up doing nothing. So the idea of this pebbles and palms was really to think, actually it's a resolve, this idea that we can, if we think of the waters of intervention and all the different layers in which we can intervene with people, then perhaps just one small act, one big act, maybe multiple acts, who knows, will actually ripple beyond our kind of remit of awareness at that point. So maybe we can just do something. So I won't go into this in depth. I've got loads of references at the bottom here, but essentially the idea being that perhaps we can sustain ourselves, which is at the core, I think, of how I've experienced psychologist social change as well, is that sustaining of hope and counteracting this sense of kind of despair when there's so much in the world that's a lot to despair about. I was going to say pretty shit, but then I thought this is being recorded, so maybe I shouldn't. But I hope that kind of you can relate to that. So essentially, you can see here that actually at so many different levels we may be able to intervene. Maybe that's with writing a letter to our MP. Maybe it's with working with an individual. I'm a strong advocate for this sense that community psychology doesn't negate working with the individuals as well. Yeah, but that's another debate. So essentially, I was invited to apply this idea to climate change and the climate emergency as well. And in doing so, really, it invited me to think about what do we mean when we're kind of using this idea of pebbles to sustain our working way forward. I won't go into too much depth here, but in the sense of psychologists of social change, thinking about what perhaps we could do, it's got similarities here. This idea of placing pebbles together, that we can come together to think about what is this pending threat or pending kind of shared trauma, albeit kind of unequally, or shared trauma that communities will face if we don't do something now, not necessarily even just next week or something. So psychology social change kind of come together as many different pockets throughout our practice. We can come together to kind of think, how can we intervene? And so I guess this idea of skimming at the same time, skimming our pebble, how well are we going to be able to intervene that we actually plan in a kind of way that can have an impact much further afield as well? Maybe that's quite contentious ground, I guess, whereby a good example, relevant example would be Remembrance Day, whereby some Extinction Rebellion activists protested in terms of kind of advocating for remembrance and memory in terms of respecting the dead, would be to take really seriously the reality that climate change would lead to kind of war internationally as well. And so I guess that's a good example also, this idea of actually lobbing pebbles as well, and seeking actually quite significant kind of change of approach, whereby we question even the idea of legislation as well, and think legislation is socially constructed, and how can we move towards seeking sustained change thereafter. So in essence, why wasps important? Well, the paper kind of elaborates actually. I'm running around in the garden thinking, oh my God, there's a bloody wasp gonna sting me. And it's this insurgence of panic. And I use the idea of climate change to be as one of these impending wasps, the challenges that we may face in society and in our personal kind of lives. And you can see here that in the paper kind of summarise a whole load of really challenging stings that come time and time again, one after the other. But good news, folks, one of the stings have gone, right, which is a significant sting as well. If we think around this kind of, let me take that back, so it's a Trump wasp, just for clarity. In reality, perhaps that was a big barrier towards seeking change in terms of the climate crisis. I'm going to storm through a few other things. So involved in ACP UK as well. In fact, so Gareth Morgan kind of led on this, and we got to chip in terms of thinking around, well, why don't our professional bodies be able to advocate for a position here? So it's not just our identities as clinical psychologists that should compel us to act to address the climate emergency, but also our very existence as moral human beings. The climate and ecological crises are deeply intertwined with issues of racism, inequity, and social justice, with those suffering most being least responsible for the harm of the planet. So this is where climate change comes into the remit of Psychologists for Social Change. And you're probably thankful to hear that some of the professional bodies are advocating for that change. To the extent in which I really, I love this one, in that actually advocating as one of the actions to take forward is a pledge to engage in dialogue with the HTPC and unions to call for timely and sensitive kind of responses to those clinical psychologists who are convicted for non-violent kind of actions of moral protests in the context of kind of climate change, which I thought, yes, come on. Yeah, don't worry about that one. That's for later. Grand. So just a little snapshot of some of the ideas that kind of can link us together. I think, as Ellen said earlier, there is much more we can do, and I think this is part of this event, is that hopefully we can come together and maybe we do evolve beyond sustaining each other in our many ripples and be able to take firm kind of collective action in terms of localized campaigns too. So come on board, Brand. Cheers.
Thanks, James. Okay, so I'd like to welcome Psyche now to talk about the work that she's been doing with the housing crisis and the activism that she's been engaged in.
I'm a first year clinical psychology trainee in Sheffield, so it's nice to see some of our tutors here. I've actually fallen into social housing, so a lot of people know about my work around BME mental health, but this is something different, and I've managed to pull the Yorkshire group into Rochdale, which is in Lancashire, and I'd like to acknowledge the North West Psychologists for Social Change as well for their support in this campaign. I'm involved with two estates, so effectively two campaigns in Rochdale, and I got involved because on Twitter the housing association that is overseeing the homes across the both estates put out a consultation, and I asked them about the cost for each of the proposals that they were putting forward, and their response was, yes, we're involving residents, which doesn't quite answer my question, so I put it back to them. And then so the alarm bell started to ring because they weren't answering my question, and I went to a consultation, and whilst I was there, out came a big group of elderly residents crying, and that was effectively my involvement in that campaign when it started in the summer of 2017. And recently, as a collective, we actually signed an open letter with people like Ken Loach, the footballer Neville Southall, Liz Kershaw, who's a radio DJ, and other people, and our psychologist signed an open letter. And the background, I guess, is for me is I think it's helpful for us to think when we're thinking locally about any social housing regeneration schemes, is to think about how inclusive are the consultations. So in Rochdale, for example, we've already got 7,000 people waiting on the waiting list for social housing. At the moment, the council are placing people in temporary accommodation, so these are families. So losing more homes in Rochdale Town Centre isn't the right solution. So on the left, we've got Lower Fairlinge. It's had it's one of the most deprived areas in the country. I think it was the most deprived in the country for about 5 consecutive years at one point. And my high school is in that area. And this on the right hand side is an estate which is across from a Lower Fairlinge, and you have people like the ex-mayor living there, Audrey, who's a teacher I'm going to introduce you to shortly. So two different estates, slightly different demographics, different vulnerabilities, but overall I think they're set to lose probably more than 500 homes. So if you're thinking about the impact then that will have on the town. And I think what it's really taught me is around the vulnerabilities of how do we create spaces for people who might struggle. So Rat Ritz, if you're on Twitter, please do follow her. I think it can feel quite isolating for her. They've not got the support because Lower Fairlinge is so vulnerable. They've not been able to mobilise themselves and get an active campaign group going, and this is why we're involved. But she does struggle to be heard. She struggles with social interactions. I think I've only ever met her from afar maybe once, we went to a meeting. But how do we create spaces to ensure people like Vicky don't get missed out, and their voices are heard and they're included? And Audrey is from the neighbouring estate of Seven Sisters of College Bank. So Audrey got involved trying to save her home soon after losing her husband. And we're very good friends now, but I only met Audrey through this campaign. And it's challenged my own perceptions of older people as well, and how active they are and how much they've got to give back. And actually we need to be sitting back and respecting their voices, and again creating spaces for them to be seen and heard. And money talks, unfortunately, and I'm very mindful. I don't know if anyone from the housing campaign has joined us this evening, but they like to send people lawyers' letters, or corporate lawyers' letters. So I'd like to know how they're using their tenants' rent money on letters to us. And one of the things that they recently did was they've calling themselves a disability-friendly organisation, the only housing association in the country. And so when we did a bit of digging around, we do have a national Psychologists for Social Change WhatsApp group as well, and somebody was helping me. They're actually just paying an organisation to be accredited, so it doesn't really, for me anyway, it's not really worth anything. It's just a title, but that they're able to buy. And so what they've now done is they've blocked me on social media. This Inclusive Employers company has also blocked me on Twitter, because I guess they don't like being critiqued. So there's a definitely massive power imbalance here, because they've got the money, they've got the resources, they've got the workforce, they've got the PR machine, and then we have two estates, and one is quite vulnerable. And so I guess thinking about the impact of social housing regeneration schemes, it's the wider impact on the town as well. It's not just on the residents who are living there, who, by the way, happen to walk into town. There's a subway then that they use to walk into town, get their fruit and veg, and then go back. So they're able to live independently. They're able to access amenities to keep them well. But with a shortage of homes in the town, I'm not sure where they're moving the residents from these estates. The last count, you can see the Seven Sisters here. There was 180 empty properties at least, and this is during the lockdown period at least. And they've not got funding, and they don't have planning permission either, yet they're emptying these flats to improve their chances of, I guess, to getting funding. So what they do though, is they don't like investing in residents. I'd encourage you to check out the term managed decline. Okay, so when they pull back from managing and maintaining the buildings, of course they're going to decline. And then they use that, this is nationally, by the way, it's not just in Rochdale, they use that as an excuse for decanting the buildings and for demolition. And if you would like to learn a little bit more, there's a film called Dispossession, The Great Social Housing Swindle. It's a bit of a depressing watch, but I think it's a crucial watch for us to really understand what's happening. And also there's a book here by Stuart Hodkinson, who thankfully is helping our campaign, Safe as Housing, and it talks about maybe the political motivations behind what's happening. And if you think about the new builds, if you look around your local areas in new builds, the quality of homes isn't brilliant at all. They're using cheap materials, small windows. I'm not sure they're good for people's mental health. So yeah, do check this out. They're on Twitter anyway, the residents. That's where our fight happens because of lockdown, but also because their voices aren't being heard elsewhere. So whilst all this is going on, it's created a lot of anxiety for people. Unfortunately, we lost an elderly resident this year, and she used to say that she'd wake up in the middle of the night with nightmares that the flats were being demolished around her, and she'd get up in the middle of the night just to check that the flats were still safe. So it's really sad actually when I saw her health deteriorating. But you know, they give themselves these big pay rises, unfortunately, and there doesn't seem to be many safeguards in place or accountability either for housing associations. And I think as a collective, this is something that we can campaign about. Well, thank you for your time.
Thanks very much, Saika. I'm going to pass over to Katie now, because I think, Katie, you're going to introduce the conversation that you and I are going to have now.
Thank you, Diane. I was talking actually, and then I realised I was on mute, so problem out. Yeah, so my name is Katie Stewart. I'm a clinical psychologist in Rotherham. Diana and I used to work together a few years ago, didn't we, Diane? And we're going to talk about supervision with justice. And I guess when we were putting this event together, we were thinking about, well, what can we talk about, and what's based in our experience, I guess. And one of the things we thought about was, okay, our role as supervisors is really important to us, and therefore we wanted to talk about like how we bring social justice into our practice of supervision. And I think I liked what you said at the start, Diane, about, I guess, it's centering it, isn't it? And I think through supervision, through our role as supervisors, we can centre those. So we're going to have a conversation, and what we've done is we've put a few questions together for ourselves, so we've got a bit of structure, haven't we? So I start off by asking, I guess, how do we bring issues of social justice into our supervision?
And I think when we were thinking about this, I was thinking, well, we always try and centre it around social context. So that should be kind of at the foreground of all of the conversations that we have about people and families that we work with, and also sort of within organisations as well. So always thinking about what's going on in the social context around a person or a group. And I suppose then thinking about encouraging a sort of a political stance, really. So resisting this idea of neutrality and encouraging sort of different perspectives, exploring political ideas, exploring social ideas. And there's something I'm really interested in, the work of Vicky Reynolds, who's an activist and therapist, and she talks about bearing witness to the people who bear the cost of unjust society. And I think there's something that's really important to me, really, when I'm supervising trainees and other members of staff, just thinking about that and having that in our minds at all times.
Yeah, so it's because it's centering in our minds and maybe having some of the conversations. And I like what you said there about I guess Vicky Reynolds and her ideas about it, because I sometimes wonder whether we can end up feeling like, oh, we can't do anything about this, let's not talk about it, or let's not hold it in mind because we can't have an impact on that. But actually it's about bringing this idea of we can have an impact on it, and if we don't talk about it, if we don't bring it into our thoughts about the people that we're working with, then I think it links to what Sasha was saying, really, that silence is saying something, isn't it? The silence is saying something. We can talk about it, and therefore we are doing something about it within those conversations. And if we're having those conversations with the people that we're supervising, we're hoping that they're then able or feel more confident to have the conversations with, like, the service users that they're working with.
Yeah. And one of the things that we were thinking about was how do we help the people that we're supervising to feel safe discussing and talking about these things?
Yeah, again, when we were sort of putting this together, weren't we, Diane? And I think it is important because we want supervision to feel safe and that for those discussions to be safe. I think one of the things that I do, and I think you do, is to try and sort of think about who are we supervising, and when it's trainees, where are they coming from, and being aware that actually not everyone's coming from the same position, and we don't know sometimes because we meet trainees for the first time, we don't know that much about them. And I guess having that understanding that actually there's a power dynamic there when you're supervising trainees, that they want to pass the placement, and therefore some of those conversations might feel a little bit more threatening. So it is important that you feel safe. It's important that we're generating that sort of non-judgmental environment, and thinking about how do we do that. One way of trying to do it, I think, is making it explicit that that there's that non-judgmental attitude, that there's trainees can make a choice about what they do and don't share about, and especially personal things. And I try and take ownership over my beliefs as well. So these are my beliefs. You don't have to share them. So you can disagree, you can challenge if you want, and trying to be really explicit about it, at the same time as understanding that might be difficult when you're coming in as a trainee.
Yeah, I think sort of following on from that, really, that encouragement that supervision is a space to be yourself and share of yourself, and thinking about kind of starting small and the small ripples. You know, there's something really powerful about sharing stories and sharing a little bit of ourselves as well, to kind of level that power imbalance potentially, but also, like you say, just accepting that, you know, perhaps that's not where a person is at, and maybe, you know, they're perhaps coming into supervision and thinking, well, I've got these competencies and I need to develop my therapeutic sort of skills, and actually you're asking me about myself, what's that about? So perhaps having those conversations about, you know, the importance of our own stories, and just a gentle way of starting that off, and starting small.
Yeah. And I guess we've probably covered a little bit of it, because I think one of the other things we were going to talk about was just what are the barriers to talking about issues of social justice.
Yeah, I think those ideas of what a clinical psychologist trainee should be, maybe, and perhaps the expectations that people, and the pressures that people might put on themselves to be a certain way, and the idea that maybe you should be neutral, or, you know, you shouldn't take a position, because what will that mean for you in terms of passing a placement, or what will that mean for you in terms of your position in a team? I suppose the important thing from my perspective, and this is something we've talked about, Katie, as well, is just trying to be as open as possible, and starting off with the openness of those conversations, and then bringing them back every time. So maybe not having the conversation and then thinking, well, that one's done, but bringing it back and continuing to talk about it every supervision. So the last question that we kind of asked ourselves was, we were thinking about the supervisors that we'd had, and how you always kind of remember, you remember something about a supervisor that you had, and you kind of carry that with you. And we were sort of thinking, well, how do we want to be remembered as supervisors? What's the thing that we want people to take away from being supervised by us? So I don't know if you had anything you wanted to share, Katie.
Yeah, I did actually. I was thinking about this, Dan, because I thought, well, I better have thought about it before I talk about it. And I think one of the things I'd really like them to remember is that I cared. I'd want them to remember that I cared about social justice, and that, and sort of maybe remember my passion about it. That's what I would hope. And I guess the other thing that I'd hope is that influenced them in some way, even though they didn't necessarily need to agree with me or take on board necessarily, but that, you know, that it could have had that impact on them. That's what I would like.
Yeah, same, really. I'd like to be remembered as the supervisor who was always banging on about social change.
Absolutely, yes. We'll have to wait to see if we get that written and any feedback we get. We're always banging on about social change.
So I think that's the end of our part there. And so I would like to introduce Hayley from Leeds Psychologists for Social Change Group to talk to us about what's happening in Leeds.
Thank you. So hello everyone, my name is Hayley and I am an assistant psychologist based in Leeds. So the group doesn't just consist of trainee psychologists and qualified psychologists. There are other assistant psychologists and mental health professionals and alike, really. So I've had a similar experience to Ellen, really, in setting up the group in Leeds, because I basically live in Sheffield and I work in Leeds. And trying to set up a group in Leeds has been quite difficult, I guess, over the course of the pandemic, because it's, I guess, had a bit of difficulty gaining traction with people attending, and just for various reasons, really. But we do have a solid established group now, and we're all really keen to, make social change happen, really. So if you are interested in getting involved in the group in Leeds, please drop me an email at pscleeds@gmail.com, or we're on Twitter as well. Trying to grow as much as possible, really. So I guess one thing that I'd like to talk to you today is about what we've done recently in Leeds, which last month we were basically reflecting on what was going on with the current pandemic in Leeds. And at the time, Leeds was going into a tier 3 local lockdown. Obviously things are very different now, the whole country is in a lockdown, but we were thinking, what does that mean for Leeds? What does it mean for people there? There's a lot of more like disconnection again, isolation, anxiety, uncertainty about the future, and also that kind of feeling between, you know, being in Leeds and that being separate from the rest of the country, and what does that mean to be in a local lockdown compared to other areas? Is what's the kind of I guess inequalities there that might kind of get bigger in different sorry, still over my words a bit there. We were worried basically. So we were thinking, what can we do? Is there anything we can do really at this stage really? And we wanted to kind of flip this side of disconnection that people were having and build connection and meaning for the people in Leeds, and I guess celebrate the area that they live in. So we created a social media campaign called #LoveForLeeds, which is basically for people to share stuff they love about Leeds, places that they like to visit, local businesses that they want to support, and pictures, videos, anything really that however people share things online nowadays, you know, anything that they can really, and just to really celebrate things and make what they see online a lot more positive, because people are, I know I am, spending a lot more time on my phone nowadays, and everything that I read is very, well, feels quite heavy and negative, and it just, yeah, so we wanted to flip that and make it into a more of a positive thing. So I'm just going to share an infographic that I shared on social media. If you've seen it, that's good, but I'm going to share it again. So yes, this is #LoveForLeeds. So who we are, why do we care, what do we want, and what is #LoveForLeeds, and how can you join in? So yes, that's just a recap of what I've explained there, and it's just really for people to share as much as they like really about what they love about Leeds. Yeah, in a nutshell. And another thing which I haven't shared yet, which is an image for people to basically take a screenshot of, and this is kind of, if you're on Instagram, it's a bit more geared at that really than Twitter. I know Instagram's more for pictures really, but the idea is that people take a screenshot of this and they reflect on their own experiences of what happened in the first lockdown, and think about what's happening, what can help them during the current one. So what has helped, what about the pandemic has challenged you? So that's kind of getting people to think about what has been difficult for them, and if other people can resonate with that. What has helped you get through? So that's where people can share the sort of resources and things that have helped them get through the first time, whether that's like going for a walk in your local park that you might like, or connecting with other people, or different services that other people might not be aware of. What will help in the future? So is there anything different that you can do during this current lockdown that you might not have done before? Who can you get in contact with? And again, that's the just something for them to share what they love in Leeds, again, about at the bottom there. So I haven't actually shared this one yet, but I am going to soon. I've shared this one online. So yeah, so I guess that's kind of it really. And if you're from Leeds or you're connected to Leeds in any way, then I'd really strongly encourage you to share your love for Leeds as well, because it's something that is quite in its infancy, and I do want it to grow and grow, and I've got a lot of I don't know, I'm just really keen for it really. So yeah, if you do love Leeds and you've got other things to share, then please do get ahead and email the email address if you're interested in connecting with Leeds. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Hayley. I absolutely love that idea. I noticed in the chat that Alex is saying, I wonder if we could do the same in Sheffield. I was just trying to think, I think Love for Leeds is really catchy. I don't know if we can think of something similar for Sheffield. Before we move on to questions, we've got a video from James that he's going to share. It's something that he's put together.
7,360 pounds daily. That is the benefit of being a friend to a Tory. When the country's in chaos and absolute calamity, take advantage with deceit and masterclass as a crony. 1.5 million pounds is an unbelievable salary, but you best believe it, because this isn't a lefty fantasy. You buy into mass homogeny as some sort of democracy. A bunch of disaster billionaires telling you, honestly, you'll be winning in everything: success, happiness, even sovereignty. You didn't pause to wonder what crooks with no integrity, no problems in defrauding you, would look like in reality. But the face of things yet still to come, we would just love to flee. Because life under this nonsense is not close to authenticity. Transparency or decency, they've not been felt for years, well beyond recently. And all this voted for consistently. My God, voted for persistently. I've never encountered self-harm and self-sabotage named so proactively as well-beaten, science-guided, definitely not deadly corruption to the core. A government with no integrity to restore. Hollow, vacuous, disastrous, and in complete control and force they will by crooked consent, more like dissent. Of not just you and I, but of their own actions with no ounce of remorse. A country in divorce. From the struggling many and the abusive few that seems plenty. And there be the People's Party, on TV all friendly, but it's the trick and pull of the game that's proven far too deadly. And if that still doesn't concern you, I might question your integrity. But may I just remind you, as it's all rather timely, £7,360 a day they're earning. That's mates rates. Naturally, voters and lefties will get measly £5 to live and breathe discreetly, quietly, silently, subserviently. That's £5.84 for those already struggling and for the poor, and £981.33 hourly for the already rich. So don't you dare sit on that fence. We cannot keep blindly dreaming, sleepwalking, regurgitating more demeaning sound bites, talk masking as truth, but even the mask disintegrating. £7,000, you've got to be kidding. Only in a world where the currency for those delivering is an echo and a memory of a workforce worthy of capitalistic clapping, but not worthy of adequately paying. Only in a world where our leaders' morals seem to be missing. £7,360 daily. That is the benefit of being in this merry gang of cronies.
Thanks for that, James. And just to encourage you to continue to ask any questions in the chat, while we've been talking and throughout all of the presentations, Dale has been compiling some of the questions that have popped up in the discussions in the chat. So I'm going to hand over to Dale now for the final part, really, and just open it up to you guys, and hopefully we can have some discussions about what you might have heard or other things that are important to you or some of the issues that have come up.
Yes, well, I was supposed to be keeping track of questions throughout that, but I've got so interested in all the other discussions that I haven't done that. So I was planning to take questions out of the chat and bring them to light for a discussion now, but if anybody wants to ask any questions, feel free to unmute yourself, turn your camera on and ask away. I'm aware there's been lots of information given to you, so if it takes a few minutes to think of them, that's absolutely fine. But the floor is yours.
You were saying at the beginning, kind of how you kind of started it from grassroots. Kind of what was the, I suppose for me, I'm just thinking if I was starting something from scratch, just off the back of what you were saying there, what do you think was the kind of real point when people started to become interested and you thought this is gathering pace? What was it that seemed to be motivating people the most?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if other people that are regular attenders could say better than me, maybe. I know we had the first time I set up a group in Sheffield. Diane and her daughter came along, who were most welcome. We had a lovely time, but it was a very small group. And then when we relaunched, I didn't even book a room in a pub, and we had 30 or so people turn up just on a really busy night at a pub, and we had to try and squeeze around a table and kind of eyeball people till they left. And we had masses of people, and then it really ebbed and flowed. There seemed to be a real bit of momentum, a lot of enthusiasm around the relaunch, and then it kind of petered out a little bit again, and we ended up with probably between 4 and 10 regular attenders, maybe 15 if we had something special going on. Speakers helped, if we had a particular event or an issue or a guest speaker coming along, I think that seemed to help. If people would come along particularly for that. And then we just ended up with a small group of people that would come regularly, and lots of people that come maybe once and don't again, or once every now and again when they can, or people that just receive the emails and are just who I might kind of see at work and who say, I'm really sorry I can't come to the meetings, but I'm really happy that this stuff is happening, even if I'm not actively involved in it. And I think even that level of involvement and awareness is great. People can be involved in it at all kinds of levels, even just kind of reading the emails, and it may inspire some kind of action.
For me, that was it was the ease of being able to kind of drop in and out, that there was no pressure. And then actually, and being a trainee, when I was a trainee, things get very busy, and there were times when I felt quite overwhelmed. So it wasn't something I could do, but I was, it felt like welcome back and able to kind of get involved again. And I think just for anyone else who's here, who's a trainee or thinking of getting involved, I think for me, it was hearing you and Diane come and do some teaching. I can't remember if you did it together or separately at the course, on the course. And it was the fact that it was something that, as when I'm sort of forging my identity, thinking about the sort of clinical psychologist I want to be, and also the fact that it was something that was almost substantiated or promoted from within the course that I was training, where I was training, that kind of inspired me and sort of motivated me. And also it's a learning curve, because I, just being honest, I don't know everything about what you guys are kind of talking about. Some things are more familiar to me than other things. So that's what I really like too. It's a real learning opportunity too. And then hopefully you can contribute when it feels useful. Does anyone else have any questions or any thoughts? Is there anyone who is thinking of coming along or has been to a few and has any questions for Ellen and everyone else while they're here? It can be quite daunting, so you can put it in the chat if you don't want to talk, it's fine.
I just had a comment and a question for Sasha and James. I found your presentation really powerful, Sasha, and I was just wondering, from your guys' article, I know it was only recently, but have you noticed or has there been much response to your article, or have you kind of had any thoughts about how you might help implement some of those changes, especially in training, or I don't know if you've spoken to the course about those changes, because I definitely noticed similar things when I was on the course as well. So I was just really curious about that.
Thank you, Amber. Yeah, I suppose in response to the article, there was one thing that immediately pops to mind, which was maybe not the first thing that we thought would happen, which was conversations around this is why psychologists need to engage in personal therapy.
All trainees need to engage in personal therapy, isn't it?
Yeah.
So the impetus was immediately popped back on
the trainee, which we both sat and spoke about. And that made us feel automatically a little bit uncomfortable, because it feels as though you're putting, again, I suppose, the responsibility back on the person that's potentially the most powerless in that situation, and who shouldn't maybe be held responsible for changing something. But then we realised, I think we were talking about it, and maybe the inference was actually that it's through recognising maybe why we want to come to clinical psychology to work with distress, that we can also recognise that there's a power within that. Working with distress is a powerful position. So as much as it might be to work through processes that you're going through, it's also to recognise the power that you have and how you might enact that. So that was one of the responses that we had, which was a bit more tricky to process. I think within training, for me personally, I've taken a lot from the work of people that are looking at kind of lived experience within training. I think there's a lot of really good work going on from Integrate Mental Health around trying to make more space for that. I think my own experience has been quite tricky at times about sort of navigating lived experience within training, and it feels as though there's this really frustrating disconnect between we are psychologists and yet we really struggle with our own personal experiences within training, and we don't have time to really process that. I think maybe other disciplines do that a little bit better than we do. But I have had really supportive experiences and really positive experiences, and it's made me really passionate about this area.
In around about the same time, originally we wanted to write that letter. We were sat on that letter for a long time because it personally resonates a lot, and you kind of have that dilemma of do you face talking about that so openly or not? Psychology is such a small world. We originally wanted it in a chapter on kind of power in context around institutions and academia and things, and it was going to be some sort of reflective naming within Surviving Clinical Psychology book, but we held back on it because actually it wasn't the right time for that. And so it's been there for a while, and I think one of the ways it's infused the training courses is that I was on the working group for the lived experience guidance for training and psychological profession that came out from DCP. So I tried to really advocate that, to think a little bit more broadly as to not necessarily only lived experience of mental health difficulties, but actually the lived experience of facing adversities as well, including the toxic systems such as the CPS, for example, who are supposedly those that are on, obviously, complainants or kind of victims and survivors kind of side. The toxicity is kind of insidious. So I think I was trying to push for, actually, let's think broadly about that idea of lived experience and the kind of security and safety that we need to be thinking about when we're around trauma-informed approaches that aren't just out looking outside. Let's look within our training communities as well. I think it's work in progress, to cut to the chase, and I think it's a continual thing that we can all keep doing, and it's something I noticed my current trainees on the call today as well, and I hope that these are some of the similar kind of ripples of conversations we've had as well, around being mindful of those kind of positions and experiences and the ways in which we describe or work with others and our communities, and the ways in which we train and model that to our communities as well, which is really important. I've talked about.
Clearly, we could both just do a whole little mini presentation on that. Lots of ideas.
That's really helpful. Thanks, guys.
Could I just say something, if that's okay? So it's Liza Monaghan here. I'm Clinical Practice Director on the Sheffield course, and I'm really, really pleased to see and proud to see so many of our trainees and ex-trainees and supervisors and colleagues involved in this, and the trainees in particular. It just makes me feel really, really good that you're all doing this. So thank you, I wanted to say, and to those who organised it. But I also just wanted to say that I think we'd be really, really interested in it as a programme. And I know we might not always seem like this, and over the last few months we've been rather distracted trying to manage to run a programme in the face of this pandemic that we're all struggling with. But we really genuinely would be interested in working with psychologists for social change on the training programs, and I think I could probably speak for other local programs. I wouldn't quite like to do that. Tom might be able to say more if that's relevant. But yeah, I just think we'd be really keen to work together with you as a group, and we're already, you know, working with people on some of these issues currently, and trainees have been very helpful in drawing our attention to other issues. But yeah, I just want to say, if it looks like we've not sort of done a lot lately, then forgive us, but we are committed and would be really up for working. I know some of us have done joint work on this already, Ellen, for example, and Diane, and, you know, we've done bits together, so I'd really like to keep that going.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'd love that too. It'd be good to speak to you about it more.
Dale, I don't know if you noticed, but Sarah's just asked on the group, are there, and I suppose this is a question to everyone, are there particular campaigns that you're focusing on at the moment, is the question. As that's open to the floor, really, the people involved in the group currently.
I can answer. I guess we're still working on sort of those individual campaigns. So one that the anti-racism stuff's still ongoing around the BME mental health, and I'm just wondering if there are people here from a BME background or any other minority background. I'd really recommend being part of Psychologists for Social Change, just so to have that peer support. And sometimes it's really difficult to work in the profession when there's other dynamics at play, and just for your well-being, it's good to be amongst peers and allies and supporters. And it is quite, for me, I found it quite empowering, even with the housing campaign and the BME mental health, but also when I've struggled with issues myself, it's a safe place to come and speak to people. So I'd really encourage you to join in.
It feels like, I mean, I don't know, that there's been your housing campaign, Psycho, in Rochdale, and somebody else brought another housing mental health related issue recently, and it feels like such a biggie. I wonder if it would be worth doing something bigger and more kind of coordinated around that. It feels like it pops up quite a lot, but I don't know, I guess the direction of the group and what things we focus on and potentially bigger campaigns of depends on the people that come and the issues that they bring. So I guess it feels like something that might happen, but we'll also wait and see what people bring kind of month to month.
I'm just wondering, just thinking about what Liza was saying, you know, we have academics at the university, you know. One of our supporters in the Rochdale campaign is from Leeds, actually, and he's involved in campaigns in Leeds. So I just wonder if there's potential here to get our tutors and academics on board with something like housing. It's such an important area, isn't it? You know, with shortages of homes and with austerity and what's going to happen post-COVID, it is quite worrying. And I think we need to be thinking about prevention as well, because otherwise sometimes you feel like you're just chasing around and firefighting, and actually if like local authorities don't have the power, as in Rochdale, and then you have these housing associations who literally are doing what they can because they can, there's no accountability. So even though we're challenging them on Twitter, actually they're getting away with a lot. And I just wonder if psychologists and academics could come together, and that could create, I guess, more weight behind housing campaigns, I think.
I'm just responding in the chat, but I may as well say it publicly as well. Somebody's asked kind of about how to get involved with the meetings. The Sheffield meetings are the second Thursday of the month at 6:30, currently via Zoom, obviously. And if you want to email me at paayorks, PAA for Psychologists Against Austerity, which it was. PAAyorks@gmail.com, which is on the screen now. Then I send out the link kind of the day before. It's also posted out on the Twitter as well. So that's how to get involved with the Sheffield group. I don't know, Leeds. Hayley, do you want to say anything about getting involved with the Leeds group?
Yeah, so we're on the we meet on the second Tuesday of the month at 6 o'clock, and I send a Zoom link out about a week or two beforehand. So yeah, the email's in the chat if you want to get involved with that.
Great. And I think doing some joint stuff in the future, you know, every now and again, coming together and doing something more regional would be brilliant.
Yeah, definitely.
Hi Alan, it's Tom from Leeds. Very nice to see you.
Oh, hello.
Hello. Yeah, really nice to see some familiar faces and some new faces. Yeah, just I felt drawn into the thank you, Psycho, for some invitation there to talk about the research side of things. I think there's a long history of research being political and certainly supportive of change. So wondering, Eleanor, you and your colleagues, I guess, could be potential commissioners of kind of evaluation projects and potentially support some thesis projects as well. I guess one of the limitations for projects is about having sort of active local people who can help in the recruitment and oversight and be more familiar with some of the literature in areas. I guess you need to pair with friendly academics at the universities. I think you'll find me and others being friendly at both of the sort of universities that Liza and I represent. So yeah, certainly, yeah, great to see. Try and be along to some future ones. Sorry, I was muted and hidden for a while. My kids have been running around the background most of the evening playing on the computer that's next to me. So yeah, sorry, that's been a bit distracting. But yeah, certainly make some contact with the courses if we can be supportive. I think you'll find lots of receptive ears.
That's really, really great to hear. It's something that I've kind of considered and thought, kind of, how would that work? And I know, I mean, I trained at Leeds, and I remember making a lot of effort for me to be able to do an unusual placement and community psychology placement with Angela, and that being a little bit unusual, but you make, you know, putting a lot of effort to make that unusual placement work. And the idea of doing some kind of service evaluation projects or theses or something to do with PSE would be brilliant if we can find a way, kind of practically, logistically, to make that work. That'd be brilliant. I'd be very up for that.
I'm aware that we've got to 8 o'clock, which is when we were due to finish. I just wondered if anyone had a final question or anything that anyone wanted to say before we end. I just wanted to say a massive thank you to everyone for coming, really. I mean, we didn't know if we were going to get 2 people or 20 people, but I think we've had a lot more than that. So we really appreciate you taking the time and coming to listen and share with us and share our passion, really, and our vision for change. I always feel really kind of supported and inspired when I meet with these guys, and I just feel like it's really important to continue to support each other, and our actions, however small, really, they do make a difference. So just to encourage you to come and join us. We do meet on the second Thursday of every month, as Ellen has said, at 6:30, currently on Zoom. Hopefully we'll soon be back in the pub. Yeah, thank you very much for bearing with us and bearing witness with us today, and hopefully see you soon.